But at this point, of course, the religious person may say, well, this shows why we need religion, because you just admitted that you can't prove that there is a true morality, but because of my religious beliefs, I do know that there's a true morality. And so that solves that problem. Now, of course, if you think about it just for 2 seconds, you'll realise that it's not as straightforward as that, because, of course, religious people differ greatly in the moral views that they hold. Sometimes they differ because they hold fundamentally different religions, which may believe that all sorts of different things are right or wrong. But sometimes even within at least one broad religious framework, whether that be Christianity or Judaism or Islam, you will find differences of opinion. So we're very familiar with that among Christians, for instance, that some Christians think that contraception is wrong, others don't, some think abortion is wrong, others don't, a whole range of things of that sort, and we see it in the debates among Islam today too, that there are some militant radical Islam who think that it's good to become a martyr by blowing up yourself and a group full of people, as long as they're a country that somehow you can see as the enemy. Whereas many more moderate Muslims would say, no, that's completely wrong. So it's obviously false to think that religion gives you somehow the automatic truth about ethics, but of course many religious people think, well, I've got the true religion and all the rest of you are wrong. But there's a big problem even if you did believe that. And the problem is an ancient one that Plato talked about in his book, The Euthyphro, when in the course of a dialogue about what is good or bad, actually it's put in terms of what is pious or impious, but essentially the argument works for good or bad. Socrates in the dialogue was told, well, something is good if it's what the gods will. And so the reply to that was really, well, is it the God's will that makes it good, or do the gods will what is good? And if you think about that, there are problems with either answer. Because if the religious person says, it's good because God wills it, that means that if God had willed something different, something completely different would be good. And in that way, ethics is quite arbitrary, just depending on the will of God. So, if God wills that we help our neighbour, then it's good to help our neighbour. And if God wills that we push our neighbour down into the gutter whenever we get the chance, then it's good to push your neighbour into the gutter whenever you get the chance. And that seems troubling. Now, at that point, of course, the religious person would often say, well, God couldn't have willed that because God can only will what's good. But if God can only will what's good, then obviously you have an independent conception of what's good, which means that you must be able to find out what's good independently of what God wills. And in fact, for religious people who want to say that God is good, of course, they really need to have an independent conception of goodness. Because otherwise saying God is good would be just like saying, well, God is what God is. And that's a tautology, that's a meaningless statement, it's not really worth uttering. So even the religious person needs to have some view as to what goodness is independently of God, or else to just accept that anything could have been good if God had willed it. So in that respect, I don't think the religious person, as far as the foundations of ethics are concerned, is in any better position than the secular person. Now let me turn to questions about the contents of religious and secular ethics. And here I think is really why this topic is an important one, and why humanists have an important role to play. That it's not just a matter of theoretical interest, it's not just a matter of trying to get people to see the truth, but it's also something that's important in societies in which we live. Because religious members of religious denominations have a strong influence on cultures and on the political processes in those cultures. And if they hold religious views that are not good ones, sorry, if they hold ethical views that are not good ones, then you're going to have a problem. And in fact, very often I think this has been the case, and it still is the case in many societies to varying degrees. So if we focus on specifically Western countries which have been dominated by a Christian tradition, I think that there are a number of things about the religious ethics of the Christian traditions that are now having a harmful influence in a variety of ways. So let me talk about that. The most fundamental, I think, can be traced to the Christian doctrine of the sanctity of human life. Now you might say, well, isn't that a very good doctrine, the idea of the sanctity of human life? Isn't it good? Hasn't it played a role in, for example, helping us to get rid of some terrible atrocities that used to occur, the gladiators' conflicts, for example, in the Roman Colosseum, that Christians said were wrong because they were violating the sanctity of human life, and generally then respecting the rights of all human beings, getting rid of racism and slavery and so on. Well, certainly I welcome all of those things. And to the extent that Christianity played some role in helping get rid of those things, that's a good thing. You could argue, I guess, about how important Christianity's role was there, how essential it was, whether it would have happened anyway. But you know, let's recognise that that ethic of the sanctity of human life played a useful role. But I think we've now got to the point where it's also playing a role that blocks some useful steps. We've seen over the last 50 years, for example, that Christianity has been a major force in restricting abortion in those countries where it remains restricted. And in countries where there are liberal abortion laws, they have generally had to be pushed through against the opposition of at least sections of Christian teaching. We see today still a heated debate in Europe as well as elsewhere about destroying embryos in order to obtain stem cells for medical research that many medical scientists tell us holds the promise of finding eventual cures for major diseases. And that is still resisted, and a lot of the resistance still comes from religious people. We also see at the other end of life many people who believe that should they learn that they are terminally ill with a condition that is painful or distressing to them, like say cancer, and they reach a point where they think the quality of their life has sunk so that it is no longer worth continuing with, so that they don't wish to continue with it. There are many people who believe that they should have the right to end their life, and since it's not so easy to end your life in a dignified and painless manner without medical assistance, they believe that they should have the right to medical assistance to end their life. But that is still, in most countries, illegal. Even countries like this one that have liberal abortion laws still prohibit either assisted suicide or voluntary euthanasia. So these are areas where I think the church, the Christian churches, are still having a major influence. And this is where I think the ethic of the sanctity of life is a serious problem in all of these cases.